Money in, money out. That's the basic idea when Trump says, we are now the richest. We are taking in trillions of dollars in tariff revenue, and so a dividend of at least $2,000 a person will be paid to everyone.
We're going to issue a dividend to our middle income people and lower income people of about $2,000. And we're going to use the remaining tariffs to lower our debt.
As far as priorities go, these things all do make sense. Could most Americans use the money? Sure. Does tackling $38 trillion of debt at the same time sound appealing? Absolutely. But do the numbers add up? Let's see. Okay, let's do some napkin math. And not even one of those fancy napkins you might serve at a nice dinner party. It's gonna be kind of grungy, half-used, leftover napkin at a diner, because this isn't exactly a detailed proposal, but let's work with it. A dividend of at least $2,000 a person, not including high-income people, will be paid to everyone, says the US president. So look, I know better than to think social media posts equal policy. But at the same time, if Trump is going to start handing out $2,000 to hundreds of millions of people, we should probably check the math. So in figuring out just how expensive this will be to pull off, we have to make some assumptions. First, that when Trump says paid to everyone, he means it. And that includes children, which would make sense because bigger households have been bearing more of the cost of Trump's tariffs by virtue of needing to buy more stuff. So it makes sense they'd be included, at least in some way. And this is, by the way, how stimulus checks worked during the COVID pandemic. During the first round of payments, children got a little less than half of what adults got. So figure, population of the United States, about 350 million, times $2,000 per American, that's $700 billion. But let's slim that down a little, because going by COVID stimulus rules, the country's 70 million kids might only get $800 deposits instead of the full $2,000. That saves around $84 billion. But then there's one more component to this, because we have to remember that Trump is excluding high-income people. How do we define that? I've seen a few different numbers on this, but the one I see quoted most often is that only the top 18% of American adults earn over $100K a year. If we can agree, then that's high income. And if you put two of those people together, you have a household income of $200K, which sure feels high to me. Then we chop those people right out because Trump doesn't want them getting these tariff rebates. 18% of around 280 million American adults is 50 million people, so that's about $100 billion we can cut out of the equation, which leaves us with a total tariff rebate bill to taxpayers of just over $500 billion US dollars. And turns out that's roughly middle of the pack when it comes to what the experts predict this will cost. One nonpartisan group figures the cost is possibly higher, up to $600 billion a year. But another analysis I've seen cuts that figure in half down to around $300 billion.
So I did some math of cutting it off just immediately at $100,000 and assuming that no children or dependents qualify. In that case, it would be those 150 million taxpayers that would get payments. And that, of course, would add up to $300 billion in payments.
But no matter which figure you take, there is a problem.
My friend Erica York at the Tax Foundation tries to be even more realistic, and she can get this to cost a mere $300 billion, which is still not enough, is more than the tariff revenue coming in.
Yes, money in doesn't equal money out. According to the US Treasury, last fiscal year, the government pulled in $195 billion in customs duties, which was made up mainly of tariffs. For 2026, the Tax Foundation Research Group figures that'll go up to around $216 billion in tariff revenue. And important to note here, while tariffs do tend to bring in more money in the short term, which we see very clearly, over the long term, revenue goes down because people and businesses find ways not to pay the higher price. So according to all the math I've yet to see on this question, without worrying too much about the exact numbers, what the Trump administration expects to pull in from tariffs is less than what it might expect to give out in rebates.
Okay, so this new rebate will cost $600 billion. How much are we bringing in tariff revenue? About $250 billion. So the reason my hands are like this is 600 is this big, 250 is smaller.
The president talks about tariffs as if they're this endless pool of money that he can use to offset various things, give certain groups money, pay down the debt. But you can't use $1 for all those three purposes. There just aren't enough tariff revenues to do all of these ideas that the president is saying he wants to do with tariffs.
So taking Trump's rebate proposal at face value, there is no clear way to make that math work. But that's not to say Trump isn't trying to solve a problem here.
In a recent CBS News poll, 2 out of 3 Americans told us they're stressed about their own finances. 3 out of 4 said their incomes are not keeping up with inflation. That's a lot of people struggling to make ends meet.
Everything, just keeps going up.
Well, I used to spend $40 a week. Now it's $140 or something like that. I just don't think it's going to go down for a long time.
There is a disconnect right now between the apparent strength of the economy and how weak it feels to most people. Yes, stocks, as a broad trend line, have never been higher.
The S&P and NASDAQ record highs again.
But you can't eat stocks. And when you think about who owns stock, who has disproportionately benefited from this overall stronger economy? Well, you see this bar representing the bottom 50% of Americans by wealth? Their portfolios mostly in real estate and consumer goods stuff. But as you get richer and richer, all the way to the top 0.1%, most of your wealth is in the markets.
The broadest index, the S&P 500, and the tech-heavy NASDAQ have set records more than 30 times this year. And there's other data that suggests the economy is still chugging along at a steady clip.
And by all accounts, the gap between rich and poor has been growing. You know how much wealth the bottom 90% of Americans hold? According to the latest Federal Reserve data, it's just under 37% of all wealth in the United States. I'll say that again, but in the opposite direction. The top 10% of Americans own more than 60% of the wealth.
A lot of households feel squeezed by both higher prices and lower wage growth than they would have hoped for.
10% of the most wealthy people in the country are responsible now for 50% of consumer spending. It's middle income, lower income folks that are really struggling as prices remain elevated.
So if the economy is doing great, but that good news is concentrated at the very top, maybe Trump's impulse to spread some of this new tariff wealth is well-intentioned. Except, beyond the problems we've already mentioned, maybe there are 2 more.
Inflation is still above the Fed's 2% target, and in recent months, it's even been trending upward instead of continuing to go down. In part, that is because of the impact tariffs are having on certain consumer goods. And then if we layer a $2,000 per person check on top of this, that pushes in the wrong direction for the inflation question. That loosens fiscal policy, which will boost demand, which will boost prices.
Yes, Econ 101. More money in the economy chasing the same goods equals higher prices, which is precisely the thing that these rebates are meant to counteract, which then raises this uncomfortable truth about the nature of the rebate itself.
I understand the sentiment of wanting to give a rebate, but true relief would be offered by lifting the tariffs that are causing the harm and the burden in the first place, not keeping the tariffs in place, keeping the economic drag that they create, and then redistributing some of the collections.
A simpler thing to do is not take the money and just leave it there. When we take it with one hand, transfer it and give it back to you, we create lots of inefficiencies and costs. We distort things.
You kind of wonder why you bothered in the first place. You could have just not done the tariffs.
So what then explains why Trump might send billions out the door in spite of these problems? Well, maybe it's because the math is secondary. Yes, Trump often boasts about the inflow.
Hundreds of billions of dollars of cash is pouring into our country now.
But he simultaneously argues that tariffs aren't just about numbers.
America will be a manufacturing nation once again. Reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal. That means they do it to us and we do it to them.
So the tariff money, literally incidental, as argued before the Supreme Court.
These are regulatory tariffs. They are not revenue-raising tariffs. The fact that they raise revenue is only incidental.
So there's that explanation. But let's also acknowledge reality, that there undeniably is a political boost one gets when you start handing out thousands of dollars, no strings attached.
It's messaging, it's not policy. So we just had elections in the US. A lot of what voters expressed distaste with, what they're troubled about, are issues like affordability, are issues like the economy. And most polling also indicates that voters are not happy with the tariffs.
This year's elections for the governorship in Virginia and New Jersey, an important redistricting vote in California, the New York City mayoral race, it was a real sweep for Democrats. The big
blue wave taking over.
The blue wave, blue wave.
The big blue wave. It was a bit of a wake-up call for a Trump administration that finds its economic approval rating sinking lower and lower as more and more time goes on.
And so I think a way to try to get sentiment up is to say, hey, look at these tariff revenues, they're going to be rebated back to you. I think it's more messaging than it is a policy prescription for the economy. Checks to people sound good, so let's talk about doing checks to people.
I think in responding to this discontent and looking toward the midterm elections, the administration has to think about ways to change Americans' minds about their economic policies. And this is maybe one rearguard attempt to do so.
Which maybe is just politics. Trump certainly wouldn't be the first to play that game. But from a strictly economic standpoint, the experts we spoke to say there's good news and bad news. I'll start with the bad.
We reserve stimulus checks for moments when the economy is in deep trouble. After a financial crisis, during a COVID pandemic, things like that. If we start doing them every time someone wakes up and is worried about their polling numbers, our fiscal policy is even more of a mess.
But the good news, again, strictly from an economic standpoint, is that there's good reason to think Trump is just talking. Exhibits A through D, all the other times he's raised this idea. In October, in August, in July. There was actually a bill introduced by a Republican senator called the American Worker Rebate Act of 2025, which proposed giving $600 rebates to Americans using tariff revenue. But that bill never made it out of committee. No debate, no vote, neither in the House nor the Senate. And this is relevant because technically it's Congress that would have to approve these kinds of rebate checks. Congress holds the power of the purse. And Republicans deciding whether to vote in favor of these checks would be confronted with a very stark question. After all the trouble of declaring trade war with the world, imposing tariffs that have upended the global economy, but raising billions of dollars in the process, is the best use of that money the American military, tax cuts, servicing the debt, or simply giving that money right back to some of the same people who paid it in the first place?